welcome everybody back to the California Small Farm Conference. My name is Evan Wigg. I'm with Community Alliance of Family Farmers, and we're excited to have you here at today's event. We are in the middle of our farmers market track, and today's workshop is the Market Ambassador Program. So we're really excited to have you all here. I'm just going to let everybody know that today's workshop is being recorded, and encourage everybody to use the chat and Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to interact. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to today's wonderful speakers. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm really excited to learn more about this new program. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Evan. My name is Maria, and I'm going to be kind of facilitating the conversation today. Evan, is the poll live already?
It is not. You want me to launch it?
Yes, that would be awesome.
Okay.
So we're going to start off with maybe about 60 seconds to have you rank what you're most interested in. Although it just says column 1, column 2, column 3. So we'll say column 1 is, oh yeah, first choice, second choice, third choice, for what your priorities are and what you're hoping to get out of this presentation. Option 1 being implementing an ambassador program at your market. Second option being more research and evaluation of your farmers market. And then the third option being actually applying to a USDA FMPP program.
And if there's something that feels really important and relevant that's not reflected there, you could probably put it in the chat at some point. Should we introduce ourselves while we're waiting?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so I'm Susie Grady with Petaluma Bounty, and I'm director here, and have started the Farmers Market Life program, and have really excited to support Maria and our team on presenting about this initiative. You want to jump in, Maria or Julia?
I can go next. And then, so I'm Maria. I am the Farmers Market Ambassador Coordinator for Petaluma Bounty. I also work as the Education and Engagement Coordinator, but wearing the Farmers Market hat right now. And then Julia, I'll pass it off to you to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Julia Van Solen Kim, and I am a Food Systems Advisor with UC Cooperative Extension and a research partner on the project that we'll be sharing more about. And I'll pass it on to Sean.
Hi everyone, I'm Sean Lopez. I am a farmers market ambassador. I work specifically at the Sebastopol Farmers Market, but as a team, we also collaborate on various initiatives throughout the county. I will pass it to Edna.
Hi everyone, I'm Edna Desma, and I'm a professor at UW-Madison. I'm one of the research partners as part of this grant. Excited to be here. Pass it on to Han.
Hi everyone, I'm Han, and I'm a PhD student from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I work for this research as a research assistant. So thank you for being here. Oh, and I'll pass it on to Masako.
Hey everyone, my name is Masako. I work with Susie and Maria at Petaluma Bounty and coordinate the nutrition incentives. Thank you for being here.
All right, Evan, are you by chance able to end the poll? I don't know if we can see the results. So, oh, there we go. So it looks like the top is actually implementing an ambassador program at your market, with the second top choice being applying to USDA grant, and the last being, although it's pretty evenly split, more research / evaluation of your farmers market. So gonna go ahead, I'm gonna start off with this so it kind of aligns well with our poll. So our goal for today is to go over the process of implementing and cultivating and then launching the actual Farmers Market Ambassador Program and what that was like. And then to kind of share some current updates with where we're at within the program, and then also highlight some future areas for growth and where we see the program moving. There are two big goals that we want you to walk away with from the end of today. The first one being having an understanding of why we chose the ambassador program and find so much value in it. And the second one being how you could implement this and customize it to any market within California or the United States at large. One quick housekeeping thing I did forget to mention, and it ties well into the next slide. So 4 of the individuals who introduced themselves are going to be speaking today. Some of the other teammates are going to be helping with answering questions in the chat. So feel free, if anything comes up, to pose a question in the chat or in the Q&A. If we can, we'll address it using the chat or Q&A in the moment. And then anything kind of more conversation-based, we'll pose to the panelists. We've got the last 15 minutes set aside just for questions. So feel free to use any of those tools. And that's why you might see some different people responding based on what different parts of the project they've worked on. So our 4 speakers for today are going to be Julia Van Solen Kim from UC Cooperative Extension, who's the North Bay Food Systems Advisor, as she said, and then myself from Petaluma Bounty, Susie from Petaluma Bounty, and then Sean speaking on his experience as a farmers market ambassador and what that's been like kind of out in the field doing the work. So we're going to start off just highlighting what exactly a Petaluma Bounty is to kind of give us a foundation for like how this organization got involved with the Farmers Market Ambassador Program. So Bounty is a farm-based community food security program. It is under the Petaluma People Services Center and was born in 2004 out of a community needs assessment in the city of Petaluma. And then in 2008, we were able to secure the land and actually start a farm. And we say the farm is kind of ground zero for all the different initiatives we work on. It gives us a place to physically gather with our community as we're kind of working on different initiatives with farmers markets and gleaning and community gardens. So that farm is kind of the initial place. And we've got some pictures of that on the next slide. The organization's vision is focused on helping consumers make informed decisions, helping farmers make a decent living while prioritizing ecological stewardship of the land, and then that people of all income have access to healthy food. And based on that vision, we have 4 priorities all the different initiatives work on, which are access, education, engagement, and empowerment. And the ambassador program ties into each of those and kind of lives it out within the community, helping us carry out that vision and work towards a better local food system, both in Marin and Sonoma County. And so one of the programs under Petaluma Bounty is the Farmers Market Life, or Local Incentive for Food and Economy, which is basically this consortium of 4 different market organizations that run, I think we're up to 18 markets now, actually. 18 markets in both Sonoma and Marin County. And they came together with a couple markets initially in 2014, and then grew to its current size in 2015, with the initial intention of focusing on expanding CalFresh and Market Match outreach, and then also working collectively to strengthen the markets and have them be a staple part of the community. One kind of quick fun stat is that to date, we've distributed over $1.6 million in CalFresh and Market Match, which has helped both community members access healthy food and then also helped bring those benefits to vendors and invest in our local community. So as mentioned, here are a couple quick pictures of the farm. It's absolutely beautiful, and as Petaluma gets bigger and bigger, as a lot of cities throughout California are, we think it's so valuable to have a green space that all of our different community members can come access. We've got volunteer hours and field trips. So having that physical space really helps us stay grounded in the work that we're doing and why we're doing it. And then one more quick graphic just to help kind of get a scope of the organization and how the ambassador program fits into the bigger picture. So we've got Petaluma Bounty is the larger parent organization. It's got quite a few different initiatives that it works on within the county, one of them being the Farmers Market Life program. And then the ambassador program is housed under that FM Life program. So today specifically, we are focused on the Farmers Market Ambassador program. And so we're going to touch in a couple minutes, Julia and Susie, on where the idea of it came from and how some of the work plan was initially started. But the big goal is to make markets a more inclusive, accessible, and welcoming space to all community members. So in terms of the logistics, we currently have 5 ambassadors that work with 4 different market organizations. One of those markets, Kelly's actually here, but Kelly runs 17 to 18 different markets. So she's got 2 ambassadors that work under her to help her execute that goal. One big thing I do think makes this program so successful is that the ambassadors are hired not by the individual market organizations, but by the consortium as a whole. And it really helps them prioritize and stay focused on those big picture goals of inclusivity and accessibility. When it can be really tough, we've all been there. Sometimes the day-to-day logistics can really take up a lot of time, and they're important and essential to keep markets functioning, but make it really hard sometimes to focus on those bigger picture projects that we'd love to see move forward, just need time. So by having the ambassadors work for the consortium as a whole, it helps them have that vision for looking at these different initiatives and having that be the primary focus of their work plan. And then Susie and Julia will touch more on this, but a lot of their work plan is informed from both initiatives that were identified through a prior USDA FMPP grant about how to make the markets a more welcoming place. And then there's also feedback loops we've created kind of in real time to help these community conversations that ambassadors are having at the market create real change that people are sharing with them about ideas they have. So both of those come together and drive the work plan for the ambassadors. And so with that framing, one more thing. I'm going to give Julia credit for this because she's the one that coined it. We were like talking about a meeting, trying to describe in the most concise way, like what the ambassador program's focus is. And she said this line, and I've taken it and run with it. I think it's one of the best ways to describe really what our goal is. And that's to bring the market to the community and the community to the market, and to make farmers markets a staple part of a community where everyone feels welcome. People can come and get to know their vendors and their fellow community members and keep their dollars local while buying high quality produce and other products, and just have that face-to-face community interaction that is so important for each of us. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Julia and Susie to talk more about the history and the idea of the Farmers Market Ambassador Program. And Julia and Susie, when you guys are ready, I'll start with the slide. When you're ready for the next one, just let me know and I'll click through.
Thank you. So I'm going to jump in first, and then Julia will jump in afterwards. So the idea of the ambassador program came from our partnership that started with Northern California Center for Wellbeing probably in 2016, when we started to collaborate to provide CalFresh farmers market tours to bring people using CalFresh to the farmers markets. And then it evolved into taste tests and other community outreach efforts. Again, trying to increase the number and consistency of people who are using CalFresh to come to the farmers markets. And then around that same time, 2016, 2017, Petaluma Bounty Center for Wellbeing and UC Cooperative Extension through Julia, we started to design a proposal for the Farmers Market Promotion Program grant for the USDA, and it took us a few tries to be able to secure those funds. Next slide. And specifically, we leveraged the Center for Wellbeing's community health worker network, curriculum, and expertise in multicultural community engagement as kind of this vision to then focus on the farmers markets. We harness this expertise to conduct participatory or community engaged research. And we, at that point, began to envision the Farmers Market Ambassador Program. We were excited about, especially the Center for Wellbeing was excited how this would shift the community health worker role of a person who is disseminating information to community to be a collaborative researcher and engaging with their communities to pull forward what was relevant to the community through their relationship building and cultural humility practices. Next slide. So similar to the community health worker model, ambassadors would be able to use their expertise to help identify and address linguistic, cultural, and logistic barriers, sometimes found at farmers markets, pay attention to barriers to participation, effectiveness of interventions, and relevance of evaluation. Maria dropped into this kind of at the forefront, but these are some of the additional pieces to the relevance and the importance of starting this partnership with Center for Wellbeing. So the ambassadors can also use their expertise to expand market capacity to implement interventions to reduce these barriers and focus on novel outreach efforts that weren't previously being done to engage community members who are not well represented at farmers markets. Next slide. So also part of this is to increase diversity at farmers markets. People needed to see themselves represented. Jumping down to the bottom point, hiring ambassadors who are integrated into the communities, speak the languages that are not represented at the farmers market, but are representative of the community surrounding the farmers markets, understanding preferences, priorities, and realities of their communities and networks. Again, more energy and resources are needed to make the markets more welcoming. And so we were particularly focused on community members who speak a language other than English as their first language. They use nutrition incentives and shop on a limited budget. Next slide. And we're going to shift over, Julia, if you feel like jumping in here.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So as Susie mentioned, in 2018, we were successfully awarded a USDA Farmers Market Promotion Program grant, which really gave us the funding needed to dive more deeply into the barriers and opportunities for people of color, CalFresh users, and Spanish speakers in our community to shop more frequently at farmers markets and have more welcoming and inclusive experience. And so we designed a research project in partnership with Center for Wellbeing and Petaluma Bounty and the farmers market managers. And the research project really centered on 4 questions. The first being what barriers and opportunities people of color and low-income community members experience in shopping at farmers markets, what the community-derived interventions to addressing those barriers were, whether interventions designed would increase the use of CalFresh and Market Match at farmers markets and help expand the diversity represented at farmers markets. And then ultimately to better understand whether using community engaged research resulted in better outcomes, better understanding of those barriers, better understanding of those opportunities, and more thoughtfully designed intervention. Next slide. We did a whole host of research, both qualitative and quantitative research. We looked at sales data through CalFresh and Market Match at the member or the participating farmers markets. We did a lot of in-depth, more qualitative research like environmental scans out in the farmers markets, looking at the environment and context with Center for Wellbeing's community health workers. We held focus groups in English and in Spanish. We did participant observation at farmers markets and with farmers market managers at monthly meetings. We did more quantitative data collection around a consumer and vendor survey. And then it all culminated in sort of a unique research process called the Delphi method, which happy to go into more about that. And so I would just give the caveat that doing this robust research took a lot of work, and we can say what that kind of evolving research has looked like in more recent years. later on. Next slide. So from this research, multi-year research, we identified some common barriers that were really locally grounded, locally rooted in our local context. There was a suite of knowledge barriers, including lack of awareness about market locations, seasons, days, and times, and of course, lack of awareness about acceptance of CalFresh and Market Match at farmers market. There were common economic barriers, and it wasn't just, there were perceptions of high prices, but we were able to sort of break apart this perception of farmers markets having high prices and and understand more nuance. In particular, that shopping at farmers markets on a limited budget is a really challenging experience, and where the hiccups in that experience of managing a very tight budget are in the shopping experience. And in particular, what rose to the surface was lack of clear pricing, which made shopping on a budget challenging, and lack of clear signage about CalFresh and Market Match, and pricing signage in particular that made shopping on a budget and using CalFresh and Market Match challenging. There were, of course, also a whole suite of cultural, linguistic, and socioeconomic barriers to shopping at farmers markets, including lack of signage and other ways to sort of symbolize that vendors spoke Spanish or languages other than English, and lack of bilingual market staff to assist with questions, especially around customers who were using CalFresh and Market Match for the first time, since there's a lot of technicality to being able to use those programs successfully in the market. And then there were a suite of physical barriers. We knew we weren't going to fundamentally redo the transportation system in Sonoma and Marin, but we were able to really sort of break that apart and better understand the physical barriers, in particular for older adults, people with disabilities, and families with young children. And so we understood more the nuances around those physical barriers. Next slide. From our research, we also asked a lot of questions around possible interventions. And so these are community-derived interventions that were recommended from the community. To address knowledge-based barriers, interventions included suggestions around expanding awareness of farmers markets and how they work, when they are, where they are, expanding awareness about CalFresh and Market Match, and also helping to increase vendor understanding and buy-in about why certain changes might be needed. And so expanding the knowledge around vendors, specifically around CalFresh and Market Match barriers and pricing transparency issues. Looking at the economic interventions that were recommended, expanding nutrition incentives. We know that Market Match only covers fresh fruits and vegetables, and participants were really interested in a broader set of Market Match-like programs that could cover meat, dairy, and eggs or protein, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then addressing pricing transparency and signage issues, which is really a capacity issue and potentially a buy-in issue amongst vendors. For cultural, linguistic, and socioeconomic interventions that were recommended, prioritizing culturally informed and culturally relevant outreach, prioritizing more programming at farmers markets, in particular directed towards families with children, and focusing on converting first-time customers into repeat customers by really leaning into making their first experience welcoming and a really positive user experience. And then lastly, we brainstormed, or there were ideas about ways to address some of those physical barriers, including bringing the farmers market to the community through online ordering, curbside pickup, and delivery hubs out in the community to make lack of physical access and lack of transportation easier to overcome. Next slide. So all of this took time, and if you're interested in applying for a farmers market promotion program grant or doing more research in your farmers markets, you know that this was a multi-year process, and it's still continuing, even though the grant funding for this particular research project has ended and we're on to a new set of grant funding. So from beginning in 2018 was when our grant started, and we really started collecting baseline data to understand where we were and sort of where we, the baseline of our research questions. Beginning in 2020, which was unfortunate timing for the pandemic, we began community engaged research. We really thought that would be grounded out in farmers markets, and ultimately had to really be a lot of virtual research because of the pandemic and wildfires that were happening during this time period as well. And then we began to start rolling out and creating interventions and piloting interventions in sort of small and targeted ways in 2022 and continuing to the present day. And then wrapped up sort of like a first pass at evaluation and dissemination of our findings, although this is sort of ever-going work. And so we continue to evaluate the success of the interventions and continue to disseminate research-based findings coming out of the first project. Next slide. So in sum, in our first USDA Farmers Market Promotion Program grant, we were able to like dip our toes into some piloted interventions. We did a lot of work around marketing, including creating bilingual, bicultural websites, standalone websites in English and in Spanish, which you see on the slide. Creating unique branding that was targeted for English speakers and Spanish speakers, and designed with a Latinx marketing firm in Sonoma County. Developing a social media strategy and rolling that social media advertising and editorial strategy out. Designing and delivering posters for CalFresh service providers so that CalFresh users could learn about market match right in the lobbies of CalFresh providers. Running a Faces of the Market campaign to really show the diversity of faces of customers and vendors at the farmers market, and lift up real shoppers from our community and have a very authentic marketing campaign. And then additional educational like A-frames and flyers around how to use CalFresh and Market Match at farmers market. Next slide. So if time allows, we can go more deeply into some of these interventions. But the first that we piloted was a meat, dairy, and eggs protein nutrition incentive. And that was very, very successful and something that we're really interested in continuing in the future, but it was short-term funding. And that was really well received both amongst customers who had had a hard time being able to afford healthy protein, and by vendors who previously weren't able to benefit from Market Match, since that's just for fruits and vegetables. And then we also rolled out a very sort of unique and targeted education campaign to CalFresh service providers so that we could bring them to the farmers market, have them tour the farmers market, and learn more about what it looks like to use CalFresh and Market Match at the farmers market, and really trying to educate the knowledge holders and communicators behind CalFresh so that they can then share it with their clientele that they're serving. Next slide. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Maria to take it from here to really dive into the nuts and bolts of the ambassador program.
And Maria, if it's okay, I'll just add a little bit of the context. So Julia mentioned that we had basically, from our perspective, we have the FMPP 1 grant and the FMPP 2 grant. So we were successful in securing the second grant, and we had originally identified and desired to implement this ambassador program during FMPP 1. But we realized we took on way more than we could. There are also changes in key staffing at some of our partners, and transformation of their community health worker program alongside the pandemic, wildfires, and other significant challenges. So FMPP 1 2018 to 2022, we did do quite a bit of the community engaged research. And then our second grant was more focused on implementation of what those findings were and launching the farmers market ambassador program. So Julia touched on some of the interventions we did along the way. And also just to note that most of those happened during 2022, which is that transition period between those two grants. Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of highlight that framing. And Julia or Maria, is there anything else that you wanted to add about those points?
I'll just reiterate that by working with Center for Wellbeing's community health workers, even before we collected data, we had an inkling that the ambassadors would be a really great intervention strategy. But then the research really gave us the data to show that indeed this was useful as a strategy in and of itself. And then also that in order to roll out many of the other interventions successfully, we needed sort of the human power, the people power that ambassadors could provide to make other like co-dependent interventions successful. So like marketing is only successful if you have the people power to lean into the marketing campaign. Or the meat, dairy, and eggs voucher program was only successful if we had the people power to roll that out. And so that's when we really realized that it needed to be its own sort of standalone new funded project and designed with a lot of depth and intentionality and resourcing to roll it out fully.
Okay, so kind of moving to the next step of the actual implementation of that ambassador program. I was hired on in June 2022 as the Farmers Market Ambassador Coordinator. And one of the key factors for the success of the program has been, or was the fact that during those first 4 to 5 months, I just called them onboarding, and it was a lot of active listening and relationship building. And as Julia and Susie just spent like that highlighting what was learned from FMPP, like the first or the prior FMPP grant, like really understanding and trying to grasp and like ask questions about what was learned, what hopes do we have for the ambassador program, what are some of the nuances of a lot of those interventions that were distilled, and trying to kind of gain some perspective on what is the reality of implementing those look like, how is that going to affect someone's work plan and that job description. And then also making sure that I took time to go to the different markets and work with each of our market managers and just have conversations with them around what was their day-to-day life like right now, what were their top priorities, and what they were seeing, especially as the pandemic was stopping or slowing down and markets are picking back up. How had their priorities changed? And if we're hiring an ambassador, what were the key skills and the key qualities for that individual that we were looking for? And so as part of that, there were like 3 things that kind of distilled that were really beneficial in my learning process to like try to get up to speed and then move this process forward, which was learning what had been tried in the past and had worked well, and like things we wanted to bring forward with us. What were things that had been tried and hadn't worked? If like as Susie mentioned, there was quite a bit of turnover, and sometimes with new people, there's new ideas that have actually already been done, and they're still really valuable to learn from, but it's one of those things like time is of the essence. We need to be trying new things. So learning what hadn't worked, how it hadn't, or why it hadn't worked, and how we can make adjustments from those learnings. And then, and I'll highlight this a little bit later too, but learning about the histories of each of the different market and market organizations. One of the big priorities of FM Life is that it's markets working together, but it's not all markets are the same. And we don't want all the markets to be the same. We want them to have their own style and their own culture to them, and to uplift that and prioritize accessibility and inclusivity, while also making sure like each market in Santa Rosa is different than the one in Petaluma, which is different than the one in Sebastopol. And that's so important because there is so much history to each of those markets, and making sure that we are focusing and grounding ourselves in that and acknowledging the work that's been put in and what makes each of them unique, while also realizing what are histories that have actually made it less welcoming and less inclusive, and that we need to deal with and then implement some interventions to make them more welcoming to community members. So after I was hired and had some of those conversations with the different market managers, we put together a job description and then started the actual hiring process. We did 2 rounds of interviews, which I thought was really helpful. One of them just kind of as like a small team, getting to know the different individuals or the different candidates. And then for the second round, invited all the different market managers that could overlap or align with the different candidates. And that ended up being a really beneficial process where the market ambassadors and the market managers spend a lot of time together in person. And so making sure that they can collaborate well and really enjoy each other's presence is really important. And so by having the candidates kind of prioritize which markets work best for them, whose like culture and whose markets resonated with them, also looking at transportation and like day of the week, like those are all factors people needed to consider. And then having both the ambassador candidates and the market managers kind of rank which candidate seemed the best for them has worked really well to make sure we are in line with having market managers and ambassadors that work well together. So one of the other realities is we were trying to hire 5 people all at the same time with geography and also just the economy as is in the hiring market. We were unable to do that. So we were able to hire and onboard 3 ambassadors simultaneously. And I think in a perfect world, we would try to keep them as like a cohort because there's so much benefit, especially in that onboarding process of learning more about what's happened in the prior grant. Why is this program being launched? What is market matching CalFresh? Like, why is that important to us? And why are we talking about that so much? And there's one more thing I was going to say, but I lost it. But like doing that learning together and asking each other questions and having that be a space where people can learn from one another with those 3 people was so beneficial. And something we've dealt with as we've had some turnover and hired people one-on-one, that the onboarding process is something we want to improve, and how to catch people up to speed as quickly as possible while also giving them time to kind of orient themselves and truly land in this position where it's so based on relationship building that if you rush that, you're going to lead or you're going to see problems downstream. So as I just mentioned, most of the ambassadors had about, I would say, 2 to 3 months to kind of get acclimated before the peak season picked up. We hired them back in March. That was when we like started our first round of hiring. And so during that, I call it the getting to know you stage, the ambassadors really focused on learning and building relationships with customers, vendors, market managers, all of the different people that are in the market community, and then also looking at their community at large and what are other organizations that work throughout the community, who are other community leaders that might be good just to have conversations with because they have a good pulse on what's important to community members. Are there schools located close by? So just kind of getting themselves oriented and looking at who are the best people to be listening to, both in the market and then also in a larger community. It's also been really beneficial. They like sometimes will hang out at the market manager booth to learn more about how CalFresh and Market Match work. And there's a lot of good questions that come up that they can bring back to us, especially from customers that have gotten CalFresh for the first time and are like learning how Market Match works, and questions that come up and how can we improve and streamline that process so people are getting as clear of information as possible. The story of the market has been one of my favorite. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but one of the initial tasks the ambassadors had was to meet with their market manager and then other influential people from the market's history to learn more about like why the market is held on the day that it's on, why is it where it is, or their previous market managers, who got it started in the first place, or their vendors that have been selling there for 10, 20, 30 years. And to really kind of capture that story, number one, because there's questions that come up and like, that's an awesome question. We have no idea. So taking the time to document the history of the market and like how community members started each of these unique markets, and then making sure we had it on paper. We haven't done anything with them yet. I think it's something we'd love to, whether it's like putting them on a website or doing a social media campaign highlighting that. but just making sure it's captured and we have it somewhere to then share with like market managers and fellow ambassadors and fellow community members too, to learn that these are markets that were started by community members because they saw value in them. And then capturing the calendar year, getting idea of like what programming is going on as is. That's another, I think, valuable piece for a consortium like FM Life, is that most of the market managers are very busy. We get together once a month for an hour and a half and have a little bit of time for sharing, but that time goes by quickly. And so just to hear like, oh, in Healdsburg, they have a zucchini festival. That's really cool. Kelly does an Easter egg festival in Santa Rosa. That's awesome. What a great way to engage kids and just like have that space to share and to capture what are markets already doing super well. And like, what are ideas that we can maybe modify and still like have or be unique to each market, but also kind of share some of those ideas. So just getting an idea of what was already going on throughout the calendar year. And then lastly, this was one of the ambassadors, Sean, it might have been you, shared in a meeting when we were hiring somebody new and getting them up to speed, that like taking time and just walking around and introducing yourself to each and every vendor, just letting them know why you're there. They said that like a lot of times when people have clipboards, you get like, is it CDFA? Is it someone from the county? Are they going to ask questions? And just letting vendors know that ambassadors are there to help them and work with them and be a tool without having any like purpose for that question or that getting to know you conversation was really important in building trust with vendors, especially now that we've been asking them for more data. Having that initial relationship just built on trust has made getting their buy-in with this program so much easier. So this is kind of a funky graphic, but it kind of captures what I would say our work plan looks like right now, where we've started off, as Julia and Susie talked about, with those interventions that were identified from the FMPP grant and the community engaged research, and built that into the ambassador work plan. They implement a lot of those interventions at the market. As they're doing that, they have conversations with community members, hear feedback, and then that feedback goes back to the ambassador plan. So you kind of have two big areas of input that are influencing what they're focusing on week to week, both interventions from the FMPP grant, and then also feedback they're hearing from community members. So just some like realities of the day-to-day work too. I think one of our biggest constrictions is time collectively together, and it's a trade-off, as most things are, where we have team members that are all over the county. That was something we intentionally hired them to be in each of their geographic locations. But that means we meet remotely once a week and don't have a ton of time together in person. And right now we've got an hour and a half together once a week. Most of that time is spent, roughly a third is just kind of reflecting back what happened at the market that week, sharing what's going on, what are cool conversations people had. And then the later 2/3 are kind of me identifying some initiatives that we've been working on and the next steps, or integrating feedback ambassadors have had, and I've talked about with Susie and Julia and other team members. And then like, how do we start actually implementing those initiatives at the market? And I will say that hour and a half goes by very quickly. We try to stay on time to respect each of the ambassadors' time, but also know like we will stay late and chat about things quite often. So I would definitely advise that if anyone were to do a similar program, like that time together is really important. And there's always that balance of having time and space together, but that also takes away from having time to actually move different things forward. So we don't have that quite figured out. I think it's something we're working on, but there is a ton of value in that collective time, while also respecting the fact that this is a part-time position and like people need time to actually carry out and do the different things. And then there have been quite a few things over the past year that have come up that have, I wouldn't say delayed, but just changed some of our perspective and informed a lot of our process. New initiatives came up. I'll touch on this in a minute, but we got a senior bounty or a CNIP grant. And so that ended up really modifying the work plan. We've had some turnover. Technology, this is out and about in person at markets. And so technology is not always the easiest tool to be using. As mentioned above, that minimal time together and balancing day-to-day logistics with big picture projects too. And then I think a lot of these initiatives that we're implementing are on paper, but a lot of them are new and haven't been done before. So a lot of times anticipating how much time they'll take can be really tricky, where it seems like, oh, this would be pretty simple. We can get it done within a month. And then ambassadors come back the next week with all of these really important and essential questions that came up, but that end up kind of drawing things out. So those are just some challenges that have arisen. And then I think a conversation we've been having a lot recently is how to prioritize the different initiatives. And okay, we have this menu of options. How do we decide what is the most important? And like, time is not, it's a limited resource. How do we prioritize and execute? And if we are constantly waiting for the perfect priority, we're never to get anything done. But then how do you also step back and say, okay, like we haven't really focused at all on these interventions. Like, how do we focus on them and like bring them back to the forefront to be adding into our work plan too? So just to kind of move into our next, I'm going to highlight some of the different programs the ambassadors have been working on over the past year. And a lot of these are focused on implementing interventions to deal with some of these barriers that were addressed in FMPP. So you might see some overlap. And that's where they're not perfectly bucketed, but I'll try to kind of point out where this program helps with this intervention, this program helps with this intervention. So tying into this, but it's a little bit more abstract too, we realize that if we are trying to implement different interventions, we need a way to actually capture what's working and what's not working. And that's where our fabulous Farm to Facts team, Han and Edna, have come in and have been such an amazing partner to work with. Kelly, who's one of the market managers we work with, was already working with them when we started this program, and it seemed like a great way to capture data, both qualitative and quantitative, on customer and vendor information. And so that ended up being a lot of our first year work plan of just learning the Farm to Facts system, making sure everyone understands the protocols and like how to use the survey and how to do the count. So we have consistent data from year to year. Otherwise we like see a jump or we see a decrease, and it's not because there was an actual change, but just a user error. So a lot of our first year has been just spent like asking Han and Edna a lot of questions, and then also teaching the ambassadors how to use those different tools and dealing with conversations around like, how do we feel about asking customers how much they're spending, and how does that fit in to like our culture and our goals, and having some of those conversations with market managers. And then also we have some surveys that we've put together for customers and vendors as well to kind of learn some data. A lot of them are questions that were identified by market managers that like, this would be awesome to have. I'd love to know more about this, but we don't have the capacity to go around and ask. The other big program that we were not expecting that took up a lot of time, as mentioned, was the Senior Bounty Bucks, which was a California Nutrition Incentive Program grant that accompanied the Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program. And so with that, market ambassadors were at 7 different markets once a month, passing out booklets of $40 to different seniors who received SFMNP. If you don't know what that is, we can kind of highlight it in the chat. But one of the key takeaways from that, and one of the key benefits from having ambassadors do that, was having these conversations with seniors and hearing firsthand a lot of the barriers they were facing. One of them being the ambassadors went to the markets at the beginning of the month to pass out these booklets, and we'd oftentimes get phone calls or hear conversations later on about like, I can't drive and someone drives me to the market and they're gone that week. What can I do to access that? Like, how do I get a booklet if I can't make it there that month because of scheduling problems? Or I have a doctor's appointment. And so hearing those just kind of reality checks and those conversations around like, this is money people don't want to leave on the table. How do we handle that accessibility piece, but also not stretching ourselves too thin? And so a lot of learning was gained out of that. We also distributed $62,000, which was pretty awesome, to seniors at the different markets. And then I think a key bullet point I do want to highlight is this top one, that as we're having tough conversations, I don't know how well versed everyone is with this program, but there's a limited number. And as the program is gaining popularity, there are a lot of tough conversations with seniors that like, we're out, like there's nothing we can do about that. And people like are facing a lot of food security issues with the rise in grocery prices, and how like by ambassadors having that and doing that together, we're able to hold that space for one another and hear each other out, knowing that it's not their fault, but it doesn't mean it's not tough, like having those conversations and hearing those realities with people. And so having that collective community with the ambassadors was really valuable, and just having that support system and support network in place as they're out and about distributing these vouchers. I'm going to kind of run through these. So Sean's got some time to talk as well, as far as like his perspective from an ambassador. So some different things they've been working on are these cool pricing signs. And so collecting vendor information on what different currencies are accepted, putting them all together, and then we'll give them passed out to vendors. And that's really hitting on pricing transparency. So people know you've got all these different market monies, like which vendors can accept what, makes it easier for customers. It also makes it easier for vendors because they're not risking accepting tokens they're not able to get redeemed. And then one of the big ones too with SFMNP was getting vendors enrolled in WIC, which can be a really time-consuming process. There's a lot of language barriers around that too, and having access to a printer. So a lot of the ambassadors, especially early on, took that on and just helped like check in with vendors on, do you know if you're WIC certified? Some of them were and had no idea. Some of them thought they weren't. So just checking in with them on that. And if they weren't certified, or if their certification had lapsed, helping them move that forward. And then one initiative we're pretty excited about is just highlighting vendors on social media that are doing all the different awesome things, and to give them that recognition and that extra publicity through a collective social media space. We've also done a ton, and this is an area we're really trying to focus on 2024 too, of just inclusive programming at markets. I'll let Sean kind of speak to one he's been working on too. So like we've done a celebration for Lunar New Year and had chef demos. A lot of children's events is always a big one. Did a bingo for National Farmers Market Week. And then this last one is another one that's been really important and really helpful, is meeting with local organizations to invite them to the market and see how the market can meet them where they're at. We had a meeting 3 weeks ago with the Children's Museum of Sonoma County about how can we like as he always says this, but cross-pollinate and like share our expertise with them and have them kind of highlight the different programs that are happening at the markets and the benefit of markets to their audience too. And then we've just started having some schools come to the markets with field trips, and then also going into schools to do presentations on CalFresh and Market Match and why markets are so important. And when I say we, I'm helping coordinate, but the ambassadors are the ones like meeting with their different teachers and different principals and different school leaders in their each specific geographic location. This has also been a big one for 2023. We had these really cool Market Match flyers that one of our marketing partners designed, and we had a whole stack of them, but hadn't actually passed them out until the ambassadors were hired. So they spent quite a bit of time just going around town and introducing themselves to different service providers and asking if we could hang them up. We had one in English and one in Spanish. And so getting them out and about in the community. And there were also a lot of good conversations and feedback that came out of that in terms of, these are really big posters and you want 2 of them hung up. Like that's asking a lot of some different service providers. So having, again, that face-to-face conversation with the ambassadors out in the community to then give us feedback as a team and how we can improve working with these different network partners. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Sean to kind of share his experience in the real deal of what it's like to be an ambassador out in the wild.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, so I was hired in the early part of last year and kind of I knew what the role kind of encompassed, but I didn't really know what it was going to look like for me and kind of what the experience was going to be like overall. So I had kind of a transition period, which was super helpful, of a few weeks just to really get to know the market, get to know kind of the context I was working within, and just build those connections. And I think Maria kind of talked about like how important it was for me just to go and let vendors know and let the management know um, that we're on their side here and that we really just want to support them and support the infrastructure of the market, support the local food economy in any way that we really can. Because again, as we start to ask things of them, or ensure that regulations are being followed, or everybody knows kind of what they can and can't accept in terms of vouchers, just knowing that I'm a person that they can trust and they can count on to support them was really helpful and continues to be. A big thing with that is like dealing with turnover. So there are currently 3 ambassadors in the team who were hired after the initial rollout, and all are, amazing at what they do. I think we have a really great team, but just speaking to that initial kind of like gaining familiarity that takes place, I think it's definitely a challenge when you have somebody in a role for a few months or a certain extended period of time, and then they step away and all that knowledge that they've kind of gained throughout that time is no longer with us. Certainly a challenge. But I've certainly enjoyed kind of building those connections. I definitely think in a perfect world, people would be here the entirety of the grant, but obviously that's not realistic, as Maria had already touched on. A big part of the role has been that administrative collaboration. So like working alongside the market manager to determine what their needs are, what their priorities are, and how that fits within the scope of the Farmers Market Ambassador Program. So what I can do to support them, as well as carry forward our initiatives and what's important to our program and our team. With that comes with establishing the connections within the community. So one of the big priorities in Sebastopol is to engage more low-income families. Another is to engage more of the Latinx community. So trying to reach different community organizations and have community-based events that will cater towards that audience is definitely something that we try to prioritize. A big part of my role as well is market match education. So every week at the market, one of the biggest things that I do, and I think this is probably the same for the majority of the ambassadors, is educating people on the benefits of market match, educating people on what they can utilize their market match for. I think sometimes there's confusion surrounding can this vendor accept this voucher, or this vendor, I know they can accept this voucher, but are they allowed to accept it for this product? And so just doing a lot of clarification with vendors and shoppers around that has been super important and impactful. And also trying to do that in the community. A lot of people I find don't know that they can benefit from Market Match, or they aren't utilizing the Market Match program, even if they are a CalFresh EBT user. Another area that was spoke about was the Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program and the Senior Bounty Bucks program. So it was super, for me, I felt it was a really kind of impactful experience on me personally to be able to distribute the vouchers. I think like working with people month after month, providing them that additional security in terms of access to food felt really great. And I think a lot of people were really grateful for us for that. And just to be the recipient of their joy was really amazing at times. I will say, as Maria mentioned, there was a bit of while you do get kind of to be the focus of that joy, even though the team is putting in all this work behind the scenes to make it happen, and it's not just you, you also get to be the brunt of frustration when things don't go the ideal way. So like if somebody doesn't meet the criteria, even though they feel that they're food insecure, or if we run out of vouchers and so somebody can't get in the program, but month after month I'm distributing to their friend who they think is in a better place than they are in terms of food security. It's just really hard to have that conversation and hold that space for them and try to assure them that you do care about their needs and that you do want to help them, that you just at this time really can't. It got a little heavy at times, but it was definitely a worthwhile experience. So I would say just making sure there's an infrastructure of support there is really helpful, because being able to lean on our team was really helpful during that time when there were moments such as those. Big thing that we've also been prioritizing is the farm to facts data collection. Just trying to, I think the biggest thing for me was trying to explain to vendors and shoppers where this is coming from, who I am within the market. A lot of the time shoppers are like, I don't, you're just another survey guy. Like, they kind of walk by you. But explaining like this is kind of on behalf of the market, of a market consortium. We're trying to gather data about markets to help bolster the local food economy. So just really clarifying what my mission is there has been really helpful. And I think I finally feel like I'm getting to a place where in terms of that, I know what I'm doing. I know what to say to people to get them to work with me a little bit better, but it's certainly a learning curve at first. Yeah, and I think areas for growth within this program, within my role, is just trying to build even more community connections, being more consistent about creating programming at the markets to bring different groups of people there. I think there's so many initiatives that we're working with, so many priorities that are constantly shifting, that it can be difficult to remain consistent on every single one of them. So just really trying to multitask, I think, and have like multiple focuses at once is really important. And I think, sorry, there was one other thing I wanted to say in regards to that, but it's eluding me. But yeah, I just think really getting out into the community is going to be my focus, and really trying to utilize those community organizations and that network that we've built and continue to build to make the markets an even better, more inclusive space for all shoppers. So I'm really proud to be a part of this program, and I look forward to seeing more and more emerge as time continues. Thank you. I'll hand it back to Maria to conclude.
Thank you, Sean. That was so helpful. I'm going to run through our next steps / goals, just so we've got time. There's 2 awesome questions that were asked. I want to make sure we've got time to touch on them. So short-term goals, we'd love to see moving forward a relationship and building our network with SSU or Sonoma State University and the SRJC. There's a lot of young people that are eligible for CalFresh and have no idea. And so focusing on that and getting them more involved in the markets, and like that being a place they can go spend time with friends out within the community beyond just being at campus. Local schools and PTAs, like I kind of mentioned, we've just started cracking into that work. Planning ahead of time is a big one. Like we don't have a ton of time together. And so we've really tried this year to be more intentional about scheduling things out way ahead of time, knowing what's in their capacity, and really being able to prioritize and execute better. And then CalFresh Awareness Month, we did a little bit last year, but had just gotten the ambassadors hired. And so want to kind of expand on what we did last year and kind of learn from years past to make it even more enriching and to get more people aware of CalFresh. Long-term, number one goal is to secure long-term funding beyond the FMPP grant. And some pieces that kind of feed into that are, and this again touches on one of the questions in the chat, but continue to advocate and expand our advocacy. Expand our advocacy for the allowance of CalFresh and nutrition incentives online, and using some of those online platforms to then hopefully be able to create kind of a food hub at centralized service providers for anyone that's unable to market or make it to markets during specific times or because of transportation or other barriers. They still have access to that produce without having to physically go to the markets. But in order to get here, we need this one. And then just continue to address the barriers in market participation through culturally informed and locally relevant education and engagement initiatives. So going back to where we started, hopefully you feel like you understand why we chose the ambassador program and see the value in it, and then can start to see how it can be implemented and customized to any market in California and throughout the US. With that, I'm going to read off the questions that have been asked and see, I think Julia and Susie, some of these might be more in your wheelhouse. I'm going to start with the one Julia just answered it, but I feel like it's still good to highlight and maybe discuss live. I'm going to use that word. But with Petaluma Bounty supporting certain farmers markets more than others, does that create a different form of inequity amongst farmers markets that don't have the same funding, staffing, and/or accessible geographical location to provide children's activities, chef demos, expanded marketing, and offer NIPs? Which is a great question.
I'm happy to speak my response to give others time to weigh in. And just underscoring, it's a great question. I think what we've tried to do is really focus on opportunities to lift all boats by raising awareness about farmers markets generally and about CalFresh acceptance and where applicable market match acceptance generally across all farmers markets. So the best example of that is the bilingual, bicultural marketing websites, one in English, one in Spanish. And those websites feature all of the farmers markets across the county, whether or not they're part of this particular project or part of farmers market life. And at the same time, I definitely hear you that by having funding to invest into the ambassadors program at specific farmers markets, it means that we have the people power to really invest in targeted, more place-based outreach strategies at specific farmers markets. And that's not all of them across the county. So a little bit of a both and would love to look towards Maria or Susie or others to expand.
Yeah, I'd love to share that when we started this consortium back in 2014 and 2015, I specifically invited all farmers markets to join our effort when we first put together our grant for market match funding. And in an ideal world, we would work with all farmers markets in Sonoma County, certified farmers markets, to provide the market match program. We've expanded in some ways since that initial call in to all the markets within Sonoma County. And then now with, so some opted out, some have their own nutrition incentive initiatives. Some were not certified farmers markets, and some didn't have the capacity or interest at the time to participate because it comes with a lot of reporting and extra admin for our member markets. And so in more recent years, there has been interest for some of the markets that are not part of our consortium. And we were just in the process of expanding and starting to onboard new markets when this funding freeze happened at the state level, so that we can no longer onboard some other markets that are not part of our effort. I also want to highlight that this is membership for the farmers markets is voluntary. And so now that we have this consortium, it's also important that anyone who considers joining us is ready to contribute, just like the other markets who have been invested long term. And so that's something that we push forward at the forefront of as a shared priority and value. We're aware of the issues of creating or exacerbating competition, and we really try to be aware of that and what we push forward. And Julia brought forward the example of the websites and doing initiatives that raise awareness about all farmers markets. Absolutely. And a lot of the initiatives that were discussed here actually were events at the farmers markets were things that the farmers markets were already doing. And we've brought kind of that equity and inclusivity lens at the location of the farmers market to make it more accessible. There are structural and other components that we as a consortium don't have the capacity to resolve all equity considerations, including geographic or transportation or other pieces. So it is in our awareness that we create potential, or we could exacerbate competition between the markets, and we try to tread carefully. Any other questions? I have to go back and find the Q&A to see if we addressed that other question.
I can have the two. I do want to be conscious of time though, because it's 12:43, so we got 2 minutes. But one of them being, would it be beneficial to mobilize market patrons to put pressure on state leaders to increase funding or expanding criteria for market match and SNPs? And I did respond to that, but just saying, yes, if like we're trying to do that a lot and are at a point where we're trying to figure out what is the best way to like actually do that. Is it handouts? Is it having stuff available at markets? Is it organizing meetings? So definitely are prioritizing that. Like we're in the stage of figuring out what's the most effective way to get people to go beyond like a conversation and like, this would be awesome. It's like, okay, then how do we get them involved with public policy? And then the last one, and Julia, you kind of answered this, maybe you can touch on it if you want to expand on it at all.
Yeah, so the question was, are ambassadors different than food navigators? And I would say perhaps. I think of a food navigator as really centering information around making farmers markets accessible to low-income people and attention to CalFresh, Market Match, WIC, Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program. I would say in addition to doing that, we're really trying to center culturally and linguistically relevant outreach. And so that may or may not be similar to a food navigator.
And I'll just quickly add that we don't have, like the trademark or register on Farmers Market Ambassador. In fact, Agriculture Institute of Marin is now launching their own ambassador program. And ours are specific to, I think, the story of how we came to be, our partnerships, and this research opportunity, and taking a multi-stakeholder perspective on some of these problems and barriers within our local food system. So I appreciate that Maria spent some time focusing on the values of Petaluma Bounty, because I think that's a big part of how it shows up in the ambassador program. We're out of time, so I don't know if we want to wrap it up, but I think we could. Maria will send out. We will send out a follow-up email, and we'll include our contact information as well as some of the great links that were included in the chat. Maria, anything else that you'd like to close on?
Nothing off the top of my head. Evan, do you have any final closing logistics?
Just thank you all so much for coming out and speaking, and of course to all the attendees out there. We appreciate you being here. We've still got a whole afternoon of workshops, and we hope to see you all at our in-person events over the next 3 days. Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody.
And thanks, Evan, for organizing all of this. CAF is the MVP.